We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? Give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. This morning the Prime Minister was asked, yet again, about his classless comments on the Bush Deep podcast. Yet again, he refused to give a straight answer. To save him from embarrassment, the New South Wales Premier stepped in and shut down the question. Why won't the Prime Minister man up, stop hiding behind his colleagues and take responsibility for his grubby behaviour?
Order. Members on my right, I want to hear the questions in silence. If there's any more interjections, if there's any more interjections, people will not be here to hear the answer. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question, and I direct him to the comments of the Ambassador of Japan, who stated very clearly the dinner hosted by Prime Minister Albanese during the Prime Minister's visit to Australia this May was held in a very relaxed atmosphere, and we believe it helped build a personal trust relationship between the two leaders. Indeed it did. We have a very good relationship with Japan, and I look forward to continuing to work with our friends on economic issues as well as interests of peace and security and prosperity in our region.
The call to the order when the House comes to order. We'll hear from the honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government working to prevent family, sexual and domestic violence, improve early intervention and make sure women and children can access support they need free from violence?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Richmond for her question. Over the last 3 months, our government has undertaken major consultation on the next phase of our second national plan to end violence against women and children. Yesterday, as part of that, myself, along with Minister Plibersek, Minister Gallagher and Assistant Minister Carney, took part in an extensive roundtable with leaders of 14 organisations who do work on the front line. That was one of more than 160 roundtables that have occurred right around the country, engaging over 1,100 people in person and over 2,000 people online. And that comes at a time where, just yesterday, it was reported there was another death of a First Nations woman in Queensland, allegedly murdered by her former partner. That death is tragic, just as every single life lost to violence is. As elected representatives, we must listen to Australians when they tell us they want violence against women and children to stop, and we must continue to act on it in the best ways that we know how. As a government, our investment has been heavily focused, and understandably so, on response and recovery for women victim survivors. That's about 80% of our record $4.4 billion investment, and yesterday the Housing Minister made another announcement about emergency accommodation. What I heard yesterday was that when it comes to the second action plan, we also need to think more deeply about prevention and listen to the voices of children. I met Connor Paul, a 23-year-old advocate for action on family and domestic violence and a survivor himself. He is an incredibly eloquent and very brave young man who told the story of violence in his family in a very personal way. It is clear that there are gaps in the system, and my government will seek to address them as part of our second action plan. It's clear as well that government can't do it all, that all of us as Australians have a responsibility to do better. What is clear is also that violence against women and children, as well as the pervasiveness of violence on social media and the normalisation of sexual violence amongst young men, such as strangulation, that is becoming more and more witnessed, and people being victims in hospitals, are festering issues that must be addressed, just as the role of technology as well and what's happening online must be addressed. They are national issues. They require national leadership. We all have a role to play to end this violence against women and children. And we'll keep working with states and territories as well, including at the National Cabinet later this month. States and territories are responsible for a lot of the actual service delivery, of course, in departments of community services around the country, which is why we want to have the update following on from the special National Cabinet that I convened to deal with these issues that set in train the second National Plan process.
Not indulgence to associate her remarks with the Prime Minister. The member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to associate the Coalition with the Prime Minister's remarks, and in addition to the states, to say that the Coalition is very willing to work with the government to prevent the violence against particularly women and children. In this cost of living crisis, we're hearing more and more women are unable to leave their violent partners because they can't afford to do so. And I would also like to, on behalf of the Coalition, to thank Connor for coming forward and being a very brave young man and sharing his stories. They're the stories that none of us like to hear, but stories that do need to be told, and they're the stories that every one of us as elected officials hear in our electorate offices every day. And sadly, despite all the investment, we're hearing it more and more. So we'd like to work with you, Prime Minister, on your National Action Plan, and we'll continue to do so until we fix this terrible, terrible issue.
The call to the honourable member for Flinders.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. A month before he made sexist remarks about the Prime Minister of Japan on the Bush Deep podcast, the Prime Minister did post this comment online. No matter who you support in politics, it is completely unacceptable to demean, objectify, belittle or offend women. So why won't the Prime Minister stop hiding behind his female frontbenchers and the New South Wales Premier and take responsibility for his disrespectful behaviour?
Order. Minister for Small Business. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank the member for her question. The Ambassador for Japan made a very clear and unequivocal comment yesterday publicly about these issues. The visit of Prime Minister Takaichi was an extremely successful one, following on previous successful visits by the Prime Minister Kishida, following on my 3 visits to Japan as well. Part of that visit was a dinner at the Lodge that was extremely warm and generous, very personal in the discussions that we had as well. It was an extremely successful visit. I look forward to continuing to work with our friends in Japan.
Just order the member for Forrest. Just remind all members about trying to constrain their imputations in questions as well. That was a very broad question, but I'm not particularly comfortable when there are so many imputations that are rife in questions. We need to make sure there are certain standards in the questions. Just remind the House to that fact. Give the call to the honourable member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How is the Albanese Labor government working to reduce family, domestic and sexual violence? Why is this so important?
Call to the Minister for Social Services.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr Speaker, and thank you for meeting Connor Paul yesterday. He is a unique young man, as the Prime Minister said. Thank you also to the member for Boothby for her question and for her advocacy on this issue. As someone who worked on the front line of homelessness, she knows the impact of family, domestic and sexual violence on our community. Ending gender-based violence is a priority for our government. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, was another devastating reminder of why this is so important. As we sat yesterday and listened to those frontline service delivery organisations talk about what we need to do in the next phase of our work on violence against women and children, I think we heard some really important and some really consistent insights. We heard that we have to do more and better for children. Children tell us that they are not just witnessing domestic violence, they are experiencing it, and they need the services to support them. We know that Escalating rates of sexual violence, particularly amongst young people, are a huge concern that we need to address. Almost 40% of victims of sexual assault are between the ages of 10 and 17. And we know that online harms are spilling into real-life harm. As the Prime Minister said, sexual strangulation is becoming commonplace because children are seeing violent and degrading pornography before they've had their first kiss. It's where they're getting their sex education from. Tech-facilitated abuse is exploding. Just as we deal with one thing like undetectable stalking apps or nudify apps, the next challenge emerges, as the Attorney-General spoke about yesterday, with those AI glasses that can record people even without their knowledge. And of course, we need to work with people who use violence, help those who are willing to change, and for those who aren't willing to change, who go on and harm one woman after another, throw them in jail. Actually deal with them. Of course, we're not waiting for the second action plan to take action. You heard from the Housing Minister yesterday about her $308 million to deliver safe, secure homes for women and children escaping family and domestic violence that will help 22,000 people. Our government's $4.4 billion investment has helped 1,400 organisations help close to 500,000 people. But while one woman or one child is frightened at home in their night, while one person fears sexual assault, while one person is ground down by coercive control, we won't rest, we won't stop. Every one of us here, every level of government, every community organisation, every school and every family has a role to play in our aim of ending violence against women and children.
Call to the honourable member for Curtin.
This is a question for the Minister representing the Minister for Science. Investment in science is critical to Australia's future productivity and prosperity, but our science system is going backwards. We rank 40th out of 44th OECD nations for STEM graduates and invest well below the average on research and development. We need bold and urgent action to reverse this decline. When will the government commit to implementing the full package of reforms recommended in the Ambitious Australia report?
Call to the Attorney-General representing the Minister for Science.
Thank you, Speaker. I thank the member for her interest in this important policy area and acknowledge her constructive engagement on this and many other issues. The Ambitious Australia report was a major undertaking, with hundreds of submissions and extensive recommendations touching every aspect of Australia's research and development ecosystem. The fact is, it will take time to deliver the reform that's required to make good on the ambition of that report. But the report presents a comprehensive set of recommendations, and this year's budget includes the first steps of the government's response. A strategic, well-functioning R&D sector is central to delivering a future made in Australia, turning ideas into industry, strengthening resilience and supporting Australian workers and businesses. Ambitious Australia makes clear that government funding alone cannot lift R&D performance. Industry, universities and the private sector all have a role to play. There is $2 billion of new spending on R&D in this recent budget, bringing the government's spend over the forwards on R&D to over $39.1 billion. We're establishing the National Resilience and Science Council to better coordinate and align public innovation investments with Australia's economic objectives. We're strengthening Australian science capability, critical to delivering the future made in Australia, with $1.5 billion invested in science and innovation, including in the CSIRO, the National Measurement Institute, the Australian Space Agency and the Square Kilometre Array. We're backing Australian researchers and making Australia a destination for clinical trials, with $589 million of investment, so Australians can obtain early access to life-changing medicines and treatments. This includes increasing disbursements from the Medical Research Future Fund, growing each year from 2026-27 up to $1 billion a year by 2030-31. The government's focused on making sure every dollar spent on R&D has significant scale and impact. To that end, we recently concluded treaty negotiations on Horizon Europe, which will give Australian organisations access to the world's largest pooled research fund in 2027, worth $155 billion. Mr Speaker, we know we can always do more, but it will take a collective effort, and industry and the research sector each have a role to play. That's why, on top of increasing public investment in science, the first stage of our response to Ambitious Australia has focused on better targeting incentives for business to invest in Australian innovation and improving coordination of our R&D efforts.
The call to the honourable member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on our national resilience by backing Australia's workforce, our sovereign capability and future manufacturing industry? Why is this important, and have there been any responses?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for that heartland of Australian manufacturing historically, Newcastle. Resilience, good secure jobs, a future made in Australia. That is what we have delivered with New South Wales and Tomago Aluminium today. Securing the future for more than 1,000 workers directly on the Tomago Aluminium smelter site itself, and more than 5,000 jobs direct in the Hunter, helping to contribute to the manufacturing supply chain and the future for the generations of Australians who will work at Tomago in the years to come. I met one worker there who has worked there for 43 years, and what he said was that he was so pleased that future generations there in the Hunter will have good quality jobs in the future. In a world that is more unpredictable and at risk of disruption, backing Australia's sovereign industrial capability and abundant renewable energy is so important. We reject the idea, and nothing upsets them more to hear that jobs are being protected, Mr. Speaker. Nothing upsets them more, Mr. Speaker.
For Moncrieff.
The same mob that told the car industry to bugger off. Well, what we think and understand is that jobs are important and that we need to make more things here in Australia, that we can't just be at the end of global supply chains. We have the raw materials, the skilled workforce, the renewable energy capacity, as well as the aspiration and the motivation to build for the future. We take that challenge and the opportunity seriously, because what we announced at Tomago today is just one part of that vision. Whether it's our manufacturing capability at the Boyne smelter, at the Whyalla Steelworks, at Glencore in Mount Isa or at Nyrstar in Port Pirie, whether it's our fuel security or investing in our critical minerals industry, those jobs, those industries, those opportunities, they are in our national interest. That's why Labor is committed to investing in a future made in Australia, to modernising our national energy grid, to securing sovereign capability and our resilience, backing Australian industry here and now, investing in jobs and industries so as to set Australia up for a prosperous future.
I call the member for Goldstein. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Councillor Ben Fry, the Deputy Mayor of Bathurst Regional Council, as a guest of the member for Calare. Give the call to the honourable member for Goldstein.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Data released today shows the average Australian worker is more than $1,200 a year poorer than they were a year ago. Why is the Albanese Labor government making Australians poorer?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. And Labor is indeed focused on easing cost of living pressures, making a positive difference, all measures that were opposed by those opposite. Whether it's the tax cuts that came in on July 1, whether it's the measures that have lifted up bulk billing to 84% nationally, whether it's the 800,000 enrolments in free TAFE, whether it's the new legislation delivering wage justice for early childhood educators, whether it be minimum standards and minimum pay for gig economy workers, whether it be expanding paid prac. Well, they won't expand it, they'll get rid of it, as what they took to the last election, even though it will make an enormous difference. Whether it be the new Fair Work Court that we have announced as well, to make sure that workers can be looked after. Whether it be the even more cheaper medicines that we've added to the PBS, the cut to the price of medicines down to $25, and remember the hysteria over 60-day scripts that they said would be a disaster, which is now in place, saving Australians money.
Gippsland is now warned. Member for Goldstein. Order. There is too much noise. This wall of noise is just too great. So I'm just giving everyone fair warning that I'd like the noise levels to decrease. So I'd like you to work with me to achieve that goal. If not, there'll be other consequences for actions. Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. They get very excited when we're talking about helping people with cost of living measures. When we talk about tax cuts, when we talk about lifting the minimum wage, when we talk about jobs and supporting Australian industry, they get very upset. Mr Speaker, I wonder why they got so upset about Tomago. Because the current Leader of the Opposition called for the entire industry to be offshored to China.
Order. The manager on a point of order.
Thanks, Speaker. The question was about the ABS average weekly earnings data, so it goes to relevance. The Prime Minister isn't addressing that weekly earnings data.
Why Australian?
The manager on a point of order.
The question goes to whether or not workers are worse off, and it's obviously in order for the Prime Minister to talk about whether they'd have a job.
Order. Order. The question was, why is the government... Order. Member for Lyon, I'm trying to deal with the manager's point of order. The question was, why is the government making workers poorer? Obviously, the Prime Minister is disagreeing with the context of that question, or the premise of that question, so he's... With a big, broad question like that, you're going to get a big, broad answer. So, order. So we're going to listen to the Prime Minister because he is being directly relevant to a very broad question.
Mr Speaker. Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'm about to get upset too because I'm about to quote work of the current Leader of the Opposition, who wrote a report which said this: in aluminium there are few prospects for growth. We cannot compete in processing. Australian aluminium smelting is uncompetitive on both capital and operating costs. Chinese smelters have a clear capital cost advantage. Although our competitive position in processing is poor, Australia is well positioned to supply the emerging bauxite export market to China. Well, there it is, Mr Speaker. We on this side of the House understand Australian jobs. They want them offshore.
Before we go any further, the Leader of the Nationals in the House was on a warning. He interjected 6 times. He'll now leave the chamber under 94A. If you're on a warning and you interject, you're not going to be here. Okay. We shall now hear from the honourable member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Industry. How will the Albanese Labor government plan to secure the future of Tomago Aluminium, support local jobs, as well as the future of Australia's manufacturing capability? How does this compare with other approaches?
Great. Give a call to the Minister for Defence Industry, the Minister for Pacific Island Affairs and the Minister representing the Minister for Industry.
I thank the member for Hunter for his question. and his staunch advocacy for the region alongside the members for Newcastle and the member for Paterson. Speaker, this is a great day for the Hunter, one of the greatest since the 1997 Grand Final. Last year, I stood in the rain with the Prime Minister when he told the workers of Tomago, "We have your back." And now we've delivered with the announcement of a joint package with New South Wales. It will keep the smelter open. It will advance the Hunter's clean energy transition, and it means we keep a strategically important asset for the whole country. And it will secure more than 1,000 direct jobs and 5,000 additional across the Hunter. Speaker, Tomago has been operating continuously 24 hours a day since 1983, and it's Hunter workers who've kept it going every day and every night. And Speaker, I'm so proud to be part of a government who is delivering for these workers. The most pro-manufacturing government in the history of this country, led by this Prime Minister. Speaker, make no mistake, this is a great day for the Hunter, an investment in the future of the region, supporting jobs and the Hunter economy, and providing certainty to workers like Matt and his wife, who spoke to the PM and I about how today's announcement has given him confidence after buying a house in Raymond Terrace. And Speaker, it's also a great day for Australia, because we're one of the only handful of countries with an end-to-end aluminium supply chain, from bauxite mining to alumina refining to aluminium smelting. And successive global shocks have demonstrated why it's so important to make things here. Importantly, Speaker, Tomago is also investing $1.1 billion in this facility. This is truly a future made in Australia in action, strengthening our energy security, supporting Aussie industry and delivering Australian jobs. Rio Tinto has been clear that these investments are needed because coal power was too expensive to keep Tomago open, and because of an ageing coal-fired power and underinvestment in the energy system under those opposite. Now, Speaker, I'm asked about other approaches. Well, the approach of those opposite was to close Tomago down. That was part of the now Leader of the Opposition's election costings. That was on top of bullying the car industry to leave. That was on top of 23 failed energy policies when in government. That was on top of voting against price caps on gas. Speaker, only one side of the House can be trusted to support Aussie manufacturing, and it's this Labor government under this Labor Prime Minister.
I'll give the call to the honourable member for Hinkler.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. The major 4 banks in Australia are all reporting declines in home loan applications of between 12% and 20% since Labor's budget of broken promises. Will the minister finally admit Labor's toxic taxes have tanked the housing market?
Call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Cities.
Thank you so much, Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. And I'm asked about the impact of the landmark housing tax reforms that our government has instituted. Speaker, reforms that for the first time mean that first home buyers are standing on a level playing field with investors. Now, Speaker, why have we taken this big step? Because we see, Speaker, that home ownership is the most important aspiration in the lives of most Australians, and our government is standing up and delivering that opportunity for more Australians. Speaker, I'm asked about the impact of these tax reforms. Let me tell the parliament what they are. These tax changes will reverse 10 years in decline of home ownership rates around our country. Now, Speaker, I understand that those opposite are the last man standing in our country who cannot see that we have a broken housing market. And the only reason that they are in that position, Speaker, is very simple. They are not spending enough time with their constituents. Our broken housing market is creating housing pain for millions of people around our country.
Order. Just if the minister can take a breath and pause. I'll just let her take her seat so I can hear from the manager.
Speaker, it goes to relevance, and I won't read out previous rulings, correct rulings that you've made around this, but the opposition wasn't mentioned in the question.
Yes, the minister won't be able to talk about opposition policy because she wasn't asked about alternative approaches or other policies as well. She was asked a fairly specific question. She had some specific information. The question was, will the minister admit toxic taxes have tanked a market? That's the question that she's going to have to find an answer for, which she can do, but she won't be able to do a very limited compare and contrast, as all speakers have done before me, but she wasn't asked about alternative policy, so that won't be able to be a majority for her answer going forward.
Thanks so much, Speaker, and very happy to speak to the impact of these landmark housing tax reforms for the country, Speaker, and the massive opportunity that they are opening up for home ownership for so many more Australians. Now, Speaker, I do want to remind the parliament, of course, that this is part of a much bigger and broader housing agenda that our government is implementing. Remember, Speaker, 260,000 Australians in their own home with our government's backing, and I want every one of them to know that they've got housing today because a Labor government saw their aspiration and backed them in. Speaker, we've got the 5% deposit program helping Australians get to the auction up to 8 years earlier, and now housing tax changes that put them on a level playing field with investors for the first time. Speaker, that policy alone will take 75,000 households that are today stuck in a rent trap and give them the opportunity for them to own their own home. Speaker, we're really proud to be making these big and important changes, and we're going to keep fighting for first home ownership opportunities for every person in this country.
Member for Page is now warned. And we're going to hear from the member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What does today's earnings data tell us about Australians' incomes? Are there any risks to the wages and retirement incomes of Australians?
Order. Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Thanks to the member for Spence for his question, also for the time that we spent with the young workers in his electorate a couple of weeks ago. Our economic plan is all about boosting wages, and today we got some encouraging news on that front, because average weekly earnings are up again and the gender pay gap is closing further, Mr Speaker. They might not want to see that, Mr Speaker, but we do. Average weekly full-time earnings are up more than $300 a week since this government was elected. The gender pay gap has fallen to another record low of 11.3%, which is a source of pride for us, but also a reminder that we do have more work to do on that front. Real wages growth are expected to return later this financial year as inflation subsides. Average annualised full-time earnings growth under this government is much stronger than it was under our predecessors. And that's because, in their own words, lower wages were a deliberate design feature of their economic policy. So workers are earning more under this government, and because of our tax cuts, they're keeping more as well. And as the Prime Minister said, that's because they are getting the tax cut that those opposite voted against and said that they would repeal. Now, this is just one way that the Liberals, the Nationals and One Nation all share a dangerous and divisive anti-worker agenda, Mr Speaker, but it's not the only way. They also want to end compulsory super for workers, Mr Speaker. Yesterday, Senator Bragg at the Press Club dismissed superannuation as a loss of liberty and a strange experiment, Mr Speaker. And in the crowd, smirking and nodding and applauding, was the Shadow Treasurer, Mr Speaker. The same Shadow Treasurer who told Andrew Bolt that people on low and middle incomes should be taken out of the compulsory superannuation system, Mr Speaker. And a Tigger does not change his stripes, Mr Speaker. This is the policy of those opposite, to end super as we know it, to hack at and to then destroy an essential part of our social and economic architecture and make people poorer at work and in retirement as a consequence. Their hatred of super would decimate the retirement incomes and the economic security of Australian workers. Their hatred of super should send a shiver up the spine of every single working Australian in this country. Now, we are delivering real and positive change in wages and in superannuation. We got it to 12%. We're paying it on paid parental leave. We're boosting it for low-income workers because we know how important super is to a decent retirement, and we will defend superannuation forever. from the dangerous anti-worker, anti-super ideology of those opposite.
The call to the honourable member for Durack.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Labor's toxic taxes have tanked the housing market. Does the Prime Minister know how many first home buyers are now trapped in negative equity?
Good question.
Order. Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the member for her question, and indeed, yesterday the Shadow Housing Minister had a day out. It was a ripper. It was a highlight and well worth watching. He said this: "As someone who was a backbencher in the Morrison government, I am sorry I didn't do more to stop the madness."
Order. Prime Minister will pause. The manager on a point of order.
Yeah, thanks, Speaker. And I'm going to quote Speaker Smith on 21 June 2021. I uphold that point of order. There was no question about alternatives. There's a lot else in the question, but certainly nothing about alternatives. Now, the Prime Minister needs to be relevant to the question, and there was nothing about alternatives.
Yes. To the point of order. Yeah. Order from the manager.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. If we are quoting Speaker Smith, I'd remind the House of two other things that Speaker Smith would always say, which was the first, the allowance of a preamble on any answer, and secondly, that members were always allowed, ministers were always allowed to compare and contrast. And on those two particular phrases, there are multiple references.
Yes, I can. The manager.
I actually have a quote of Speaker Smith on preamble. The Prime Minister, and I'll quote again. This is 11 February 2020. The Prime Minister's had more than a preamble. The question was very specific indeed, and
order.
No, I haven't undermined myself. And Speaker, could the Prime Minister? I know he's had a bad week, but
just get to the point.
Yeah, I know you've had a bad week. If I can, if you just
order, we'll just get to the point quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, the Prime Minister's had more than a preamble. The question was very specific indeed, and whilst the Prime Minister is entitled to talk generally, the start of his answer, he needs to either come to that question. It's time to come to the question.
In order. Members on my right are going to cease interjecting immediately. The manager's right to raise his points of order in the way that he does. 17 seconds is not a very long time, or 20 seconds is not a very long time. But Speaker Smith also said on the 22nd of October 2019, but as I've said before, both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition do get some tolerance to compare and contrast. And I'm glad you've raised Speaker Smith, because I've got a whole lot of his quotes ready to go, which will be great. We can go through all of them. The Prime Minister will continue.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I do thank the member for that point of order, backing us up. I'll make a couple of points that are pretty clear. The latest RBA data shows less than 1% of all mortgage holders are in negative equity. Okay, point one. Point two, guess what? That's less than half of the mortgage holders who were in negative equity under the Liberals in 2017 and 2019. Less than half, Mr Speaker. Less than half. In April 2019, the RBA reported just over 2% of borrowers were in negative equity.
You should have checked that first.
Unbelievable. This is while median dwelling prices fell by 4.3% between May 2018 and May 2019, with Sydney dwelling values dropping 10.7% over that year.
Order. Members on my left.
Mr Speaker, no wonder when they let their Housing Shadow Minister out yesterday, he not only went on to say he was sorry that he didn't do more to stop the madness, He described universal superannuation as one of the biggest public policy failures since Federation. When he was asked whether some low-income Australians will have to accept housing that is substandard this morning, he said, yes, definitely. When he was asked, here's a tricky question he got asked. If Angus Taylor can't lift support for the party by the end of the year, will you have to change leaders again before the next election? Senator Bragg, that's really a question for the commentators to get into. Seriously. Seriously. Then when he was asked, did he want to broaden the base and increase the rate of the GST, I wouldn't take anything off the table. And this is a moderate. This is a party that now not run by this bloke but run by Tony Abbott. And he's a moderate. Goodness knows. I mean, you know, I reckon they should broadcast one of their shadow ministry meetings. It would be pretty entertaining.
Time has concluded. Order. When the House comes to order, order. Order. The Attorney-General will cease interjecting. Give a call to the honourable member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to help more Australians into safe, decent and affordable homes, and is the Minister aware of any risks to this work?
Call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Cities.
Speaker, I thank the member for Brisbane for her question. Speaker, Labor believes that every Australian deserves a safe and a decent place to call home. And that's why we have a $47 billion housing agenda which is delivering real change to the Australian people. 260,000 Australians into a home of their own through the 5% deposit scheme. We're changing the tax system to make sure that the scales are tipped towards first home buyers. We're pulling every lever we have to build more homes for the country, Speaker, more infrastructure, more tradies and less red tape. And that includes work to streamline the National Construction Code after we paused changes following last year's economic reform roundtable. Now, Speaker, you've just heard the Prime Minister talk about the big day out from the Shadow Housing Minister yesterday, and boy was it something, Speaker, a real wild ride. In a speech one might euphemistically call wide-ranging, Senator Bragg covered his views on communism, North Korea, state-sponsored corruption and giving superannuation to cats and dogs. I'm not making this up. But, Speaker, his big idea on housing, and the one that I actually really want Australians to hear and understand, is this. The Liberals' answer to housing affordability is substandard housing for Australian on low incomes. Speaker, it shouldn't be controversial that Australians should be able to buy a home knowing that it's safe and decent for themselves and their families, that the walls of that home won't fill with mould, that the balcony won't leak, that the plumbing works. These aren't luxuries, Speaker. But asked directly this morning whether some low-income Australians should accept substandard housing, Senator Bragg said, yes, definitely. He was asked whether homes need any energy efficiency standard, and his answer was, you've got to have a window in a room. Now, how the opposition's been asked how should Australians cope with a freezing winter at home, and the Shadow Treasurer had the answer for this one. Get this, he said, put a jumper on. Wow. Now, Speaker, there's something really familiar to me about the tone here. Remember when Joe Hockey told Australians that if they couldn't afford to buy a home, they should get a good job that pays good money? Speaker, now the Coalition says that lower-income Australians should settle for a substandard home. Just be happy with your window. That seems to be the message. Well, Speaker, old-fashioned snobbery is alive and well in the Liberal Party of Australia, and Labor rejects it completely. We have a really clear belief. Whether you rent, whether you're buying your first home, whether you're wealthy or working class in this country, you deserve a home that is safe and decent and built to last, and that's what our government is delivering for you.
Before I call the member for Kooyong, please to advise the House that we have Councillor Brett Tarasi, the Mayor, and Councillor Ron Bowra, the Deputy Mayor of Bass Coast Shire Council, as guests of the member for Monash in the gallery today. Welcome to question time. Give the call to the honourable member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, the AFL and NRL make more than $90 million a year in income from gambling. They partner with gambling companies to profit from the losses of their fans. They pay zero tax on that gambling revenue. Do you think that it is appropriate that billion-dollar sporting codes receive tens of millions of dollars in tax-free income every year from a predatory industry which harms 3 million Australians every year?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Kooyong for her question. And it goes to the AFL and the NRL, two sports that are fantastic sports and sports of which can bring great joy to Australians. Also the occasional disappointment, some of which can last for 43 years, Mr Speaker. Can I say that when it comes to the legislation that is before the parliament at the moment, one of the things that it does, and I would hope that there would be some acknowledgement in it, is that clubs, NRL in particular, which currently have sponsorship on their jumpers, such as my club, South Sydney, has Crown, Brisbane Broncos have Star Casino, Canterbury Bankstown have Laundry Hotels. Indeed, there's something like 15 clubs are going to lose revenue as a result of the legislation that is before the parliament, if it is carried, with amendments next week. There's also the case that grounds, there's been PointsBet Stadium, a range of grounds as well. So that on top of the issue, which I know has exercised a great deal of discussion about advertising on TV or radio, if you have a stadium that is named and sponsored, such as the one in the member for Mackellar's electorate for quite a while, by a betting organisation, that represents not however many an hour, that represents 24/7 advertising. And one of the things that this legislation will do is to remove that. We have made it clear in putting forward that the AFL, to be fair, do not have sponsorship of betting organisations on their jumpers. They have a different internal code. But for the National Rugby League, this will have a major impact on the clubs, and we've made that clear. That is something that is a really important reform. I do make this point as well about the AFL and the NRL, that clubs, be they my club, runs South Cares that run Indigenous programs around rural areas. AFL clubs will sponsor local junior footy as well. There's been a massive expansion of women in AFLW and NRLW. That's a fantastic thing. And one of the things we need for social cohesion, in my view, is more team sports. Is kids getting off their devices and onto the fields. The NRL and AFL play an important role in.
Call to the honourable member for Deakin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting higher wages for Australian workers, and what has been the response to this support?
Call to the Minister for Employment and the Minister for Workplace Relations.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Deakin for his question and his commitment to helping Australians to earn more. This Labor government is absolutely committed to delivering for Aussie workers. We've introduced important changes to our workplace laws to get wages moving for hard-working Australians, and we are seeing the results. Just this week, the Fair Work Commission approved world-leading minimum pay for food delivery drivers. From From Monday next week, Uber Eats and DoorDash workers will now earn $31.30 per hour as a minimum. This historic outcome was the result of new laws that the Albanese Labor government introduced to ensure that gig workers didn't have to rely on tips to survive. Now, our government has also taken action to make enterprise bargaining easier, and now 2.6 million workers are benefiting from higher wages through enterprise bargaining. We on this side of the House are determined to close the gender pay gap, and that is why we legislated to put gender equality at the heart of the Fair Work Act. This Labor government has backed and funded pay rises for early educators and aged carers, because we recognise this majority female workforce was being undervalued for the work that they do. And of course, this Labor government has backed wage rises for our lowest paid workers on minimum award wages, many of whom are women, each and every year since we've been in government. And we are making progress. Today's ABS data shows that the gender pay gap has reached a new record low of 11.3%. Now, getting wages moving has been a priority for this Labor government, and the ABS data today also confirms that Australian workers are on average earnings an additional $300 per week better off since our government was elected. Of course, while this government has been focused on getting wages moving, what have those opposite been doing? Whether it's been Liberals, Nationals, One Nations, they have fought against our reforms every single step of the way. And the Coalition has bragged about deliberately keeping wages low as a design feature of their reforms when they were last in government. Of course, the Leader of the Opposition has recently heavily criticised the pay increases for aged carers and early educators, and One Nation has repeatedly refused to back wage increases for Australians.
Order.
We know that Australians are under pressure, but it's this Labor government that is...
Call to the honourable member for Bowman.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. John and Cheryl from my electorate have told me, quote, if the cost of living isn't bad enough already, Labor's change to private health rebates is another burden that will add at least $1,000 to our annual health bill. Prime Minister, let that sink in, an extra $1,000 for an elderly couple already struggling with their bills. Why do Australians like John and Cheryl have to be punished with a new $11 billion tax grab just because Labor can't control its spending?
Call to the Minister for Health and Ageing. Order. Order. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for the opportunity to repeat a few things I was able to say yesterday, frankly, about the pretty misleading campaign that the insurance industry is running, about the numbers involved here, that the opposition appear to be quite happy to parrot word for word. The numbers just used by the member there are entirely different to the position we've put out very clearly, that the average impact of the decision that we announced in the budget would be in the order of $220 to $250 a year. Nothing like the figures that the member has talked about. Now, I'm asked about, or the Prime Minister was asked about, why we have done this. And I repeat what I said yesterday, which is to say that we have had to take some hard decisions in this budget. We have a responsible approach to budget which seeks to reallocate spending to new areas of need. And as I think everyone in this parliament and the community knows, there is a growing need for aged care services in a population that is ageing rapidly.
Order.
The Minister for Aged Care is doing a terrific job in bringing to Cabinet proposal after proposal to deliver more beds, more packages of support at home and better care to older Australians. And every single dollar that we will save through this change, a difficult change, I admit, but every single dollar we will save through this change is ploughed back into aged care services. And I repeat what I said yesterday. If those opposite are opposed to this, First of all, are they saying they don't support the additional beds? They don't support the additional packages of support at home. They want to continue to see older Australians pay for part of the cost of their showers.
The minister will pause. The manager on a point of order.
Thanks, Speaker. And once again, the question didn't talk about the opposition. It talked about private health insurance rebate, and John and Cheryl have asked a question about the $1,000 increase, and I think the minister should be brought back to that question.
On the point of order.
Mr Speaker, it's always been the case that when a question includes a sort of rhetoric like "let that sink in," that sort of language has always opened up a broader definition of relevance.
Yep. Look, the minister can't continue his answer. Will continue his answer, but he wasn't asked about alternative policy. So if he's going to talk about the impact that he was asked about, and I think it was $11 billion, he needs to, and I think that's the context that he was referring to. I want him to specifically refer to the funding. If he's talking about projects, he just can't talk about the opposition's policies, because the manager was correct. He wasn't asked about the opposition's policies, but he can refer to the policy that he is responsible for and the funding involved with that.
Thank you, Speaker. I was asked why we have taken this decision, and I'm reminding the parliament that there are choices that every budget involves. Now, we have made the choice to deliver more aged care services, more aged care support at home. Now, others may take a different choice, not to deliver that aged care or to find, to put it on the credit card. I make no judgment about that. But what the impact of this will be is to return to the original design of the private health insurance rebate when it was introduced by John Howard, which is not to have a different level of subsidy paid to households on the same income because simply of their age. What we will have now is two households next to each other on exactly the same income, one of which happens to be over 65, the other of which happens to be, for example, in their 40s or their 50s with children, both in private health insurance, receiving the same level of subsidy from taxpayers. Now, for most, that will be about a quarter of their health insurance bill paid for by taxpayers, and that will continue to be the case.
Concluded. Call to the honourable member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. What are the latest detections of H5 bird flu in Australia? And how is the government working with industry, the states and the territories to help strengthen biosecurity and the on-the-ground response to this virus?
Call to the Minister for Agriculture, the Minister for Fisheries and the Minister for Forestry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do want to thank the member for Hasluck for her interest in the H5 bird flu, and I know that she, like many members in this place, are very concerned. And she has, of course, been in touch with me, as have many other members in this place. And I also want to thank those members of the parliament who attended the briefing from the Chief Vet last night in relation to how we are managing the H5 bird flu outbreak in Australia. The member for Hasluck, and I know some other Western Australian members, are particularly concerned about black cockatoos in Western Australia. So I'm pleased to update the House that the Western Australian Government has today announced a vaccination trial on threatened black cockatoos at Perth Zoo. So this will focus on 3 species: the Carnaby's, the Bordens and the forest red-tailed black cockatoos, and I know that many Western Australians will be very pleased to hear that indeed. This is, of course, part of our national approach in terms of the rollout of vaccinations that we are working with states and territories about. It's obviously part of our significant preparedness that we have undertaken, including years of vaccine testing undertaken by the CSIRO specifically for Australian native birds. As I said yesterday, of course, the Victorian Government has also announced the little penguins at both Phillip Island and St Kilda will be vaccinated as early as next week. And I know that the member for Macnamara is particularly pleased about those penguins that he has spoken to me about in his electorate. And it's terrific. I know that many Victorian members are really pleased that we'll start vaccinating those penguins with the Victorian Government next week. I also wanted to update the House on a new development in my home state of Tasmania today. Tasmania's state laboratory has returned its first positive result for the H5 bird flu in samples taken from a brown skua, a migratory bird. It was found at Rocky Cape in the member for Braddon's electorate, and I did meet with her earlier today to talk about her concern about this H5 bird flu in Tasmania. We have sent samples to the CSIRO lab for confirmatory testing and will provide an update to the public as soon as these results do become available. If confirmed, this would be the first confirmed case of H5 bird flu in Tasmania, and that will be 6 states that then have the bird flu in Australia. This is, of course, not unexpected, and I know that it's disappointing, but it is a sign that our biosecurity system is working and our detection system is also working. I'm also pleased to update the House that the Tasmanian Government today has also indicated that it will prioritise the vaccination of orange-bellied parrots, a very special bird that I know that many people are aware of, and I do want to reassure the Australian public that we will continue working on our H5 bird flu response. And I want to reiterate that there is no evidence of any detection of the H5 bird flu in our poultry or agricultural systems, and that the risk to human health remains low. I also want to thank the Australian public for reporting sick and dead birds at birdflu.gov.au.
Give the call to the honourable member for Ryan.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Since the gambling reform legislation was introduced, how many times has the Prime Minister met with representatives of the gambling industry?
The call to the Prime Minister.
It's really easy, Mr Speaker. The answer is 0. And what I said yesterday, I want to reiterate what I said yesterday, was I get that some people come to this issue from different perspectives. But rather than have a debate about the substance of the issue, to go to people's motives is, I think, demeaning of the role of this parliament. One of the things that I have done is said that I would engage across the board with parliamentarians on these issues. I've certainly, over a long period of time, have had many discussions with crossbenchers about these issues. I have had discussions with the Leader of the Opposition. I don't think he minds me saying that. He's been in my office more this week than I went into the Prime Minister's office as Leader of the Opposition in 3 years. Because what I do is actually I'm prepared to engage across the parliament. And I'm sorry if that causes some upset to some behind the Leader of the Opposition, but I must say it hasn't been his attitude, which has been constructive. These issues are complex. There are issues of foreign engagement as well. The idea that gambling is an issue that just occurs on free-to-air TV or just occurs in one area is just not right. The idea that betting on sports is the major gambling addiction in Australia is absolutely false, And what we have done as well, and the idea as well that these sporting codes are somehow evil, I reject. Sporting codes do a fantastic job of engaging young people in particular, being a binding force for people's identity with their local communities, and are really important. And I think that is something that needs to be acknowledged. Now, we'll work through the debates taking place in the parliament over the last couple of days. We'll bring that debate to finality next week. People will work through our processes of engaging respectfully with my caucus colleagues. We had a position adopted at our ALP National Conference in Adelaide, which will be reflected in the amendments that will be.
Give a call to the honourable member for Tangney.
Thank you very much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Emergency Management. How did the trial of the AusAlert National Emergency Warning System perform? what other investment is the Albanese government making in emergency management ahead of the upcoming higher-risk weather season? Thank you.
Call to the Minister for Emergency Management, the Minister for Regional Development, the Minister for Local Government and the Minister for Territories.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Tangney for his question. What people across this parliament might not know is that the member for Tangney was the 2020 Police Officer of the Year in WA and knows firsthand the importance of having a national warning system that is important. And I also want to acknowledge the member for Maranoa, who was the minister during the Royal Commission, and I know it's a long-standing position of his that there needed to be a consistent national warning system. On Monday, July 27, the Australian Government undertook a test of our new National Emergency Warning System, AusAlert. From Darwin to Geelong, Kalbarri to Bundaberg, millions of mobile devices across Australia received that test alert. And the test was successful, with more than 94% of cell towers broadcasting that notification. It showcased AusAlert's ability to deliver emergency warnings at pace and at scale. Mr Speaker, AusAlert is potentially life-saving technology. It is a more modern, more capable system that will get emergency alerts to more people in a more timely manner than the existing text-based emergency alert system. AusAlert will be ready for use from October this year. Existing warning channels, including radio, television, social media and, most importantly, community outreach, remain critical during any natural disaster. But the delivery of AusAlert is another example of our government delivering real change for the Australian people. It builds on improvements that we've already made in emergency management, including the establishment of the National Emergency Management Agency, including the Disaster Ready Fund that is delivering disaster resilience and risk reduction across the country, with 449 projects announced and underway. We've invested more than $100 million in our national aerial firefighting capability to support states and territories to respond to crises. And we continue to invest in the National Emergency Management stockpile to support the rollout of critical goods and services to communities quickly. Countries such as France and the United States of America already use cell broadcast technology as part of their emergency warning toolkit. And, Mr Speaker, I'd like to take a second to send our thoughts to friends across Canada, France and the United States who are currently battling devastating wildfires. A contingent of 185 Australians and 57 New Zealanders departed for the US this week, joining the 74 personnel that are already deployed to support wildlife suppression efforts. A further 40 are in Canada and 28 in France, supporting our international partners in their time of need. And, Mr Speaker, Australians have some of the finest firefighting capability on the planet. And I know I speak for everyone across this parliament when I wish those personnel a safe deployment, thank them for their bravery and their dedication in assisting others during this very difficult bushfire season.
Call to the Prime Minister. The member for Herbert resume his seat. Order. Members on my right will cease rejecting the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I ask further questions to be posted on the notice paper. And can I join with the Minister in praising our firefighters who are representing Australia overseas as well. We should be so proud of what they do in Canada, in the United States, in Europe, and we certainly wish them a very safe return. But they do our nation proud.
And on indulgence, the Leader of the Opposition.
If I may,
of course,
Mr Speaker, and like the Prime Minister, I do want to associate the coalition with those comments. We like those on the other side of the House, are very proud of our firefighters, because many of us live in parts of Australia where those firefighters play an enormously important role every single year. Many of us, over the course of our time in our electorates, have also participated in the work that's done by our firefighters. So we wish them well, and we know they will do us proud.
I'll just move to papers before we move to the MPI, and I call the Leader of the House.
Speaker, these documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.
I have